I went to the Omaha Beach, but see, I came up through the south. I came in on the right after the North African invasion, and that's how I got in Stars and Stripes. Was when I got there, they were looking for an artist, and I just happened to be there at the right in their office at their building where they had their office. And they said, "Do you want a job?" And I said, "Sure do." And it took me away from the Air Force, the camouflage unit I was in, and started my whole life all over again. You know, I mean, it was saved my life, as a matter of fact. You know, and so I got immediately on Stars and Stripes, which is the World War II newspaper, military newspaper, and that changed my whole life. And I was able to meet a lot of interesting people. You know, I'd meet General de Gaulle and Edith Piaf and people like that, and I made sketches of them. The only thing I didn't do, which was so unfortunate, and I regretted all my whole life, that when we landed in north and southern France, right after the invasion, my first assignment was to do a portrait of Matisse, and I chickened out. You know, I said, "You want me to do a portrait of Matisse? You know, I'm 18 years old," and I was just intimidated by his name. You know, and I so regret that. You know, I spoke pretty good French even then, and we could have become good friends, and I could have sold the painting for a lot of money at Sotheby's someday. But I so regret that turning that down. You know, but my life on Stars and Stripes was interesting. They send you to the front and drop you off and say, pick you up in 3-4 days, and you're on your own to find stories. In other words, you're an artist reporter, and you find your own stories, and they just keep roving and hope you don't get shot. You know, and that's the only thing I'm worried about, is that an artist has to stay there and draw, while a photographer can take a picture and get his head down. But an artist can't do that. He has to stay there, and he's a little exposed, you know. But I've never thought about it too much. You know, I get shelled every now and then. But well, I was a professional artist for 1 year before I got into the Army, and how that happened. I was in a big studio in Chicago. I was 18 years old, and one of the salesmen that we had there disappeared for about a few weeks, and he came back, and he was now had a military uniform on. He was a second lieutenant in the American Army, and he stuck his head in where we were all working, right, the 5 of us in the bullpen. He said, "Anybody want to be an artist in the Army?" And I remember working away, and I said, "Sure," and I never even looked up, you know, for my work. And he must have taken my name down. So when I was drafted, my name popped up, and they pulled me out of the Air Corps, and got me a job in the that's how I got it. Well, I originally went in with the camouflage. The military think, an artist, you must know something about camouflage, which I knew nothing about. But they got me over there, and it would have saved my life, because all I'd been doing was painting camouflage on airplanes, sides of airplanes. But at least you know, you're not shouldering a gun in the front, you know. Yeah. But from there I went to Stars and Stripes. I just happened to be lucky enough to be there when they needed an artist, you know. So that started my whole life over again. But this is all the patches I wore during World War II. And actually, only officers were allowed to wear this line here. I was only a sergeant, but I pretended I was an officer. Why? Because I would be sent off with the French Army to do a story, and the French Army ate well, and they had wine. They had good wines at every dinner, so I passed myself off as as an officer. And so I wore these officer's rank. And Yank magazine was the magazine. I wasn't officially on Yank magazine, but I did work for them for about a month in Rome, and they liked my stories. So, and I did so much work for them, they said, "Oh, you're one of us," you know. So I include the Yank patch. It wasn't officially. There was only two other writers were accorded a dual citizenship with the Stars and Stripes and Yank, and Andy Rooney was one of them, and one other can't think of his name now, and myself. You know, there were three of us who had a dual citizenship.
Yeah.
This is the Algerian troops coming into the Monte Casino. Say most of my battlefield experience was at Monte Casino, because I was there, you know, about 6 months, I guess. Anyway, so they're right off the deserts. They were wearing their desert clothing, and they're now in the cold, muddy mountains of Italy, and they're also carrying their dinner with them, which was a little lamb, and they always dragging along the. They kind of bothered me.
Oh, that would bother me.
They always dragged it out with their dinner for that night. And they dragged it along with them, and I wasn't too happy about that. But they were interesting and knife fighters. I don't know if I told you that story about the. So when they came in off the desert, the first job was at Monte Casino. See, the Germans were at the top of the mountain where the monastery was, and they settled in just below the peak of the mountain, and Mark Clark, the general, ordered all the bombing of the monastery. Well, meanwhile, the Italian refugees had holed up in the monastery, and he ordered the shelling of the monastery, which I thought was terrible, you know, but there was all these. There must have been a couple hundred civilians in there. They all got killed, and nobody ever talks about that. You know, anyway, so the Germans moved down from the top of the mountain and had all their guns just around the base of the monastery, and now they had all new holes from all the bombing, that there was new places to hide in, and meanwhile these guys were brought in to infiltrate, and what they would do is they crawl up the side of the mountain, hands and knees, and start in the blackness of the night, and they would find people, soldiers sleeping on the ground in their foxholes, and they would couldn't see a damn thing, but they would feel the helmets, and if it was a rough helmet, that meant there was an American sleeping there, and they would pass on. If the helmet was smooth, that meant he was German, and they would cut his throat and keep right on going up the side of the mountain. So the next morning they find all these Germans with their throats cut, and the German officers were very annoyed and pissed off at that, and they wired down to the Americans down below at the base of the mountain and said, "This is no way to fight a war." They were very unhappy that they found all the men with their throats cut. So that's what these guys' job was, to cut throats, you know. So they were night fighters and knife fighters at the same time, you know. And they were rewarded with shoes. I remember that when I went up there. Originally they had open-toed sandals in the snow and froze themselves anyway. And this was a truce they had in World War II, and this is one of the souvenirs that the soldier got from the Germans. What happened was they had a firefight just the night before I got there, and a lot of bodies were lying on the field, of course. And the Germans had radioed down to the Americans, said, "Can we have a little truce and clear the bodies from the field?" And the Americans said, "Yeah, why not?" And so they got on the field, and as they were picking up the bodies, they started talking to each other. And like typical Americans, you know, and they just start exchanging souvenirs. And of course, the Americans had cigarettes and chocolates, and the Germans had schnapps in their canteens instead of liquor. I mean, instead of water, they had liquor in their canteens, which was unusual. I didn't know that myself. And they got so friendly that the Americans or the Germans said, "You guys are like we are. What are you doing shooting at each other?" They invited them over for dinner that night, and of course the Americans had to say, "Well, that's a good idea, but we have to check with our officers back in the in the rear area." And of course they said, "No way, you can't fraternize with the Germans." But the pity of it is what the war could have been over that day, you know, because the fighting men wanted to go home with it. What are we doing, you know, shooting at each other. And so anyway, that was a truce in Bell. So this drawing was one of the souvenirs that the Germans gave one of the American soldiers, and I made a sketch of that. And so anyway, so there was a truce in World War II, which nobody knows about.
Do you know where it took place, or you were there?
That was in Monte Cassino, in Italy.
Do you remember the day, the time?
Pardon me?
Do you remember the date, perhaps?
Yeah, it would be, that would be in 1944, of course. That would be, I was there for, God, months. Beginning of January, it was very cold too, and it was winter, the end of the winter and spring of '44, and they finally broke through. This is in Monte Cassino, and I was being shelled where the shells were dropping around us all the time, and I was kind of taking cover right underneath the window here. It was a hut for animals, you know, but the medics had put up a station there, and the young soldier had shrapnel in his back, and the officers taking the shrapnel out of his back. So I was crouched down below, but I heard moaning, and so I'm supposed to be professional, I'm supposed to be drawing, so I stuck my head up above and saw what was going on there. Although I was not an officer, I joined the French Officers Club. That's where I started learning my first good fencing lessons that I got from the French coach there, and and of course Europe was starving at that time, and Americans had plenty of food, and they had what they called spam, which is a can of rations of meat, and so I would pay for my lessons, my fencing lessons, but with a can of spam I got free lessons for a whole week, which I thought was interesting. This is the drawing I did of Hermann Göring from life. I was in the press gallery. Right behind the, right next to where the defendants were, and of course I was about 19 at the time, or maybe 20, and when I think about it, I had the Yiddish saying "chutzpah," which means you can do anything, and I did my drawings with a fountain pen, so there's no room for any errors, and you worked directly, and it was difficult to do. It was one of my last assignments I did for Stars and Stripes, but it turned out to be I was the only artist, I think, to cover the Nuremberg war trials. And
where are those sketches today?
They're in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Well, this is the only other flag of Iwo Jima that exists. They have the big, well-known, publicized flag raising it, and I believe there's no other existing flag left from Iwo Jima. So this is a captured flag from by the 5th Marines. They signed it on the bottom, and they wrote Iwo Jima right across the meatball.
And where did you get it?
I don't remember where I got it from. I've been collecting for years.
Wow.
And I have some other interesting. I have the armbands from the D-Day, that the Americans wore in the water, but they're all rusted from the salt water, you know. And I have 2 of them, you know. I collect a little of everything.
Did you ever see a concentration camp? Did you ever?
Unfortunately, I did not, but I did get to Hitler's bunker, and I was at the Reich Chancellery right after the fall of Berlin. It was one of my last assignments before I did the Nuremberg assignment. They sent me for about 2 weeks with the Russians. They had just conquered Berlin, and so I roamed around bombed out. Berlin was heavily bombed, and you couldn't find a place to sleep or anything, except in the suburbs. You could find an intact house, so I could get a bed somewhere. But it was interesting. The Russians were. I spent some time with them, and they're very suspicious. They pretended they were your friends, but you could see that they barely tolerating the Americans. And I went into Ribbentrop's office, and I remember this is in the Rice Chancery, and I remember seeing his desk was overturned, and all his calling cards were strewn all over the floor, and I grabbed a bunch of them, put them in my pocket, and over the years I'd thrown away them all, except I had one left. And there was a bomb that went through an aerial bomb that went through the Rice Chancery, and unexploded, and went through 4 floors, and lodged in the cellar. And I made some pictures of that. It made a big hole in each floor, and there was a Russian guard standing, keeping people away from. Of course, there was very few people there. Growing up in Chicago, of course, I grew up during the Depression,
Yeah.
which was, we had no money, you know, everybody was broke. My father had 2 grocery stores. He lost them both because he would extend credit to everybody, and nobody paid him, so he went out of business. And it was tough, but you don't realize when you're a kid, you accept it all. We were near the airport, the Midway Airport. We were in walking distance, very close. But I had to shift for myself. My parents were Eastern European, and they gave you a bed, and they gave you food, and you were on your own. And it was up to you to get an education and do something with yourself. And I remember my mother said, you know, when I was about 14 years old, she said, "What are you doing with yourself?" And I said, "I'm going to art school." She said, "Oh, you are?" And she had no idea. So I just taught I made my own life. You know, I taught myself art, and the teachers would realize I was so serious about what I was doing. They would allow me to show up every day, and didn't charge me for anything. But I won 3 scholarships at my senior year in Chicago, and I was able to accomplish all 3 scholarships in 3 months, and you're out on your own. And I immediately started making good money right off the bat, and I was making a lot of money, and I was just a little kid, you know, and I remember I had some. I went out and bought 2 cars, and I smashed them both up, and I'm still paying for the one accident I had when I smashed my face up. You know, paying for that. But
So
I
how
got hit by a locomotive after that. The second car I had, I got hit by a locomotive, and I survived that. And then during the war, I fell off the top of the Alps mountains. I fell a long way down, and I survived that too. I had more things happen to me. I've been run through with a sword through my chest, and
When was that?
for a championship match,
No.
my buddy, his broke, but they're sharp when they break. They went through my chest, and I got run through another 2 times. I had 3 altogether, and I had a lot of things happen to me. I shouldn't be alive today. The only thing that hasn't happened to me, I haven't been shot yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I ended up having I started out and ended up having 2 lives. One was in the sports area, and one is in the artistic area. And I was an illustrator for 60 years, I guess. And my sports life was, I made the Olympics in 1952, and I was also picked for the 56 Olympic Games, but I got hurt in training, so I didn't go to the 56 Games. And I was number 1 to go to the 60 Olympics, you know, but I had something happen. My wife decided to have a baby the night before the last tryout, and I was up on my feet all night long, and I had not one iota of sleep, and I was so tired. And the first time in my life, I didn't do like I usually do, and so they bumped me off the team, and that would have been my 3rd Olympics. But then I won the World Championship, and there's the trophy was over there, hiding behind the helmet, and I was the only American to ever win that. That was the International Athletic Challenge. Well, I had so many championships. I had about 50 of them, you know, one after the other. So a lot of them. I medaled in every one. But I lived in Europe, you know, for almost 6 years, you know, in the military. But I lived like a civilian. So I taught myself French and Italian and Spanish, and so I could travel easily, you know, pass through borders in those days. And
What brought you to Westport?
well, I had to find this light. You can't find a studio light like in Paris. All the artists have North Light studios, and I said I want one. When I remember going visiting several of the artists in France, and they all had these big studio North Lights, and you can't find them. They're very rare. And I looked all over Jersey, I looked all over New York, and finally I came to Westport and I bought this.
Did you come because you knew other artists were here?
No, just through this window. That's the reason I came here.
So you were surprised that it was an artist colony?
Well, I knew it was an artist colony. I'd heard about it, but I'd never been here. And there was 200 of us here when I came here in 1953. And I'm the last one. I'm the last artist, illustrator. They're all gone except for me. But there was 200, I remember, because I was in charge of the exhibition committees. And so I had to gather all the artists' work. They'd bring all their work through, and I'd line it up all along the walls here. Just didn't have all this stuff here at that time. And it was inspirational to have the best artists in the country have the work. So I had a private exhibit room here, a private gallery. And
Who were some of your artist friends back then?
well, I liked Al Dorn. Al Dorn, who was the owner of the famous art school, and we both had Mercedes Benzes, and we kind of compare notes, you know. And he would come up here and visit me, you know, bring his Mercedes Benz here, and we'd compare. I had a 300 SL Mercedes Benz, which is a model of it there, which is very rare, and I had it for 25 years, you know.
Nice.
It's worth a couple million. Yeah, when I came back, and I stayed for another 2 years working for the French magazines as an artist. I had a girlfriend who with the Folie Bergère, and she expected me to stay there forever with her. But I did stay for 2 years in Paris after the war, and working as an illustrator for the French magazines. And I came back, and a lot of the editors knew about me because I had a little notoriety being on the Stars and Stripes, and the Life magazine was calling me, Sports Illustrated, Time magazine, and Reader's Digest booked me for 27 years. I did about 5 drawings a month for Reader's Digest. But then I worked for Sports Illustrated for 6 years, because when I made the Olympics, they said, "Oh, you know everything about sports." I knew about 3, you know, intimately, and I was able to fake the rest, you know, to bone up on it. But I had a good career as an artist, and there were 7 books Sports Illustrated put out on various sports, and they'd send me out with a champion, you know, and I'd photograph them and draw from them. I was known for macho men, but you always have to have a pretty girl, lady in the picture somewhere.
Right.
And so I had to hire attractive professional beauties over in New York. That's where I met Grace Kelly, and she posed for me for a couple of years. No, it was for 1 year or so. But they were all attractive professional models, and so I had a penthouse in those days, and I'm making good money, and I'm on my way to
Nice.
Olympics, and I thought sure Grace Kelly would go for me. I thought sure, but I had her heart set on Hollywood, and I met her and my wife at the same time, and who was very attractive, by the way. She passed away recently. This is my wife here, and
Pretty.
yeah, and that's her there also,
Oh.
and that's her.
Wow.
And this other lady was a model that posed for me around the time. It was very platonic. I knew her for 40, 50 years.
Did you
Well, that
do
was my only pinup I ever did. The only pinup, and that was Miss Ireland. And she had a body that would stop a clock. and she was so proud of it too. She said, "You'll never see a pair like this," she said, "in your lifetime." It was true.
You've never seen another pair like that,
Yeah,
huh?
she was so proud of her breasts, you know. I don't know. She was so proud, and it's true, you know. She was magnificent. You know,
What was this
magnificent
for?
specimen, you know. I just made it up.
Oh, just
I don't
for
think it was ever
fun?
published. I don't think so.
Oh.
Everybody wants to buy it from me, but I don't want to sell it. It's the only one I did, you know.